The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Edinburgh as Marcus Thompson revved his vintage Harley Davidson outside his small apartment. The powerful engine roared to life, echoing through the narrow alleyway where he lived. Marcus was not your typical motorcycle enthusiast. At 32, he worked as a delivery driver for a local courier company, but his real passion lay in the freedom of the open road and the brotherhood of fellow bikers. Marcus had grown up in a working-class family in the outskirts of the city. His father had been a mechanic, and his love for motorcycles had been passed down through generations. The black leather jacket he wore today had belonged to his grandfather, who had ridden motorcycles during World War II. The jacket was worn and weathered, but it carried stories and memories that made it priceless to Marcus. Today was supposed to be a routine delivery run through the city center. Marcus had 3 packages to deliver to different locations, and he planned to finish early so he could meet his biker friends at their usual weekend gathering spot. The weather was perfect for riding, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that made the Scottish summer morning feel alive with possibilities. As Marcus navigated through the busy streets of Edinburgh, he couldn't help but admire the historic architecture surrounding him. The Royal Mile stretched ahead, bustling with tourists and locals going about their daily business. Street performers entertained small crowds, and the aroma of fresh coffee and pastries wafted from nearby cafes. This was the Edinburgh he loved, vibrant and full of life. His first delivery took him to a law office near the castle. As he parked his motorcycle and removed his helmet, several passers-by glanced at him with curiosity. Marcus was used to the attention. His tall frame, combined with his leather jacket and the impressive Harley, often drew looks from people who seemed both fascinated and slightly intimidated by his appearance. The second delivery was to a small bookshop in the old town. The elderly shop owner, Mrs. Henderson, had become familiar with Marcus over the months he had been making deliveries to her store. She always greeted him with a warm smile and often offered him tea, which he politely declined due to his tight schedule. "Beautiful day for a ride, isn't it, Marcus?" Mrs. Henderson said as she signed for her package. "Absolutely perfect, Mrs. Henderson. Days like this remind me why I love this job," Marcus replied, adjusting his leather gloves. His final delivery was to an office building near Princes Street. As he made his way there, Marcus noticed an unusual amount of activity in the area. Police barriers were being set up along certain streets, and he could see military vehicles parked in designated areas. Traffic was being diverted, and officers were directing pedestrians along specific routes. Marcus realized that preparations were underway for the Edinburgh Military Tattoo, one of the city's most prestigious annual events. The Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo was a world-famous display of military precision, music, and pageantry that took place on the esplanade of Edinburgh Castle. It attracted visitors from around the globe and was considered one of the highlights of the Edinburgh Festival season. The event featured military bands, dancers, and performers from various countries, all showcasing their talents against the dramatic backdrop of the historic castle. For many, it represented the pinnacle of military tradition and ceremonial excellence. The weeks leading up to the event always brought increased security and careful coordination between various military units and local authorities. After completing his final delivery, Marcus decided to take a different route back to his apartment. The diversions and road closures meant he had to navigate through some unfamiliar streets. As he rode through the city, he couldn't shake the feeling of excitement in the air. The anticipation for the upcoming military tattoo was palpable, and even though he had never attended the event himself, he could appreciate the significance it held for the city and its residents. Marcus had always had a complicated relationship with authority and formal institutions. His rebellious nature and love for the freedom of motorcycle culture sometimes put him at odds with what he perceived as rigid structures and unnecessary rules. However, he had deep respect for military service members and understood the sacrifices they made for their country. As he navigated through a particularly narrow street that he hoped would lead him back to familiar territory, Marcus noticed he was approaching what appeared to be a staging area for military personnel. Several official vehicles were parked nearby, and he could see uniformed figures moving about with purpose and precision. The street seemed quiet compared to the bustling main roads he had just left. Marcus slowed his motorcycle, trying to get his bearings and figure out the best way to continue his journey home. The GPS on his phone had lost signal in this part of the old city, where the ancient buildings seemed to interfere with modern technology. As he came to a stop at what appeared to be an intersection, Marcus looked around to assess his options. The narrow streets of Edinburgh's old town could be confusing even for locals, and the current road closures had made navigation even more challenging. He needed to find his way back to a main road where he could reorient himself. It was then that Marcus noticed a figure approaching from his right. The person was wearing what appeared to be a formal military uniform, complete with ceremonial decorations and polished boots. The uniform was immaculate, clearly prepared for an important occasion. The individual wearing it carried himself with the bearing and the posture that spoke of years of military training and discipline. Marcus assumed this was one of the many military personnel who were in the city for the upcoming military tattoo. The man appeared to be walking with purpose, perhaps heading to a meeting or rehearsal. Marcus decided he would ask for directions, as military personnel were usually knowledgeable about the city layout, especially during major events like this. As Marcus prepared to call out to the uniformed figure, he began to rev his engine to get the man's attention. The sound of the Harley-Davidson was distinctive and powerful, designed to announce its presence. However, what Marcus didn't realize was that his motorcycle was positioned much closer to the uniformed figure than he had initially judged. The narrow street created an echo effect that amplified the sound of the motorcycle engine. What Marcus intended as a simple attention-getting gesture became something much more dramatic. The powerful roar of the Harley-Davidson reverberated off the stone walls of the surrounding buildings, creating an almost overwhelming acoustic experience. The uniformed figure, who had been walking with measured steps and focused concentration, suddenly found himself startled by the unexpected and tremendously loud sound. The timing couldn't have been worse. He was carrying what appeared to be important documents or materials related to the military tattoo, and the sudden noise caused him to lose his composure momentarily. Marcus watched in horror as the situation began to unfold in slow motion. The pristine military uniform, which had clearly been prepared with meticulous care for an important ceremony, it was about to become the victim of an unfortunate accident that neither man could have anticipated. The stage was set for an encounter that would change both their lives and create a story that would become legendary in Edinburgh's rich tapestry of unexpected events. What started as a simple case of asking for directions was about to become something far more significant, involving military protocol, personal honor, and the unpredictable nature of life in one of Scotland's most historic cities. Neither Marcus nor the uniformed figure could have imagined that this moment would soon escalate into an incident that would be remembered and retold for years to come, becoming part of the folklore surrounding the Edinburgh military tattoo and the colorful characters who call the city home. The uniformed man, Colonel James MacDougall of the Royal Scots Guards, had been having what he considered a perfect morning until that moment. At 45 years old, he had served his country with distinction for over 2 decades. His service record was exemplary, filled with commendations from operations in various parts of the world. Today was particularly important for him, as he had been selected to lead one of the key ceremonies during the Edinburgh military tattoo. Colonel MacDougall had spent hours that morning preparing his dress uniform. Every button was polished to perfection, every crease was razor sharp, and every medal was positioned with mathematical precision. His wife Margaret had helped him with the final adjustments, ensuring that everything met the exacting standards expected of someone in his position. This wasn't just any uniform. It was his ceremonial dress uniform, reserved for the most important occasions. The documents he carried contained the detailed choreography and timing for his unit's performance during the military tattoo. These papers represented months of planning and coordination between multiple military units, event organizers, and city officials. The performance he was to lead would be watched by thousands of spectators and broadcast to millions around the world. As he walked through the quiet street, Colonel MacDougall was mentally reviewing the sequence of movements his unit would perform that evening during their final rehearsal. The Edinburgh military tattoo was not just a local event. It was an international showcase of military excellence and Scottish culture. Every detail mattered, and there was no room for error. The sudden, thunderous roar of the motorcycle engine shattered his concentration completely. The sound was so unexpected and so loud in the narrow stone street that it seemed to assault his senses from all directions. The acoustic properties of the old Edinburgh buildings turned the motorcycle's engine noise into something resembling a sonic boom. Colonel MacDougall's immediate reaction was one of startled surprise. His military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for the sudden explosion of sound in what had been a peaceful morning walk. His carefully controlled posture wavered, and he took an involuntary step backward. In that split second of disorientation, disaster struck. The colonel's polished dress shoes, designed for indoor ceremonies rather than outdoor navigation, found no purchase on the slightly damp cobblestones. His arms, which had been carrying the important documents with military precision, flew outward in an attempt to regain balance. The papers scattered in every direction like leaves caught in a sudden wind. But the real catastrophe was yet to come. As Colonel MacDougall struggled to maintain his footing, he stumbled directly into a large puddle that had formed near a drain in the narrow street. The puddle, which had been nearly invisible against the dark cobblestones, was deeper than it appeared. Marcus watched in absolute horror as the impeccably dressed military officer went down. The splash seemed to echo even louder than his motorcycle engine had moments before. Muddy water erupted upward, soaking not just the colonel's legs but splashing across his entire uniform. The pristine white elements of his dress uniform immediately turned brown with dirty water and street grime. The colonel's ceremonial hat flew off his head and landed several feet away in another puddle. His medals, which had been gleaming in the morning sunlight just seconds before, were now dripping with muddy water. The carefully pressed fabric of his uniform was not only wet but also stained with the accumulated grime of Edinburgh's ancient streets. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, both men remained frozen. Colonel MacDougall sat in the puddle, water still dripping from his uniform, staring at Marcus with an expression that combined shock, disbelief, and what appeared to be barely controlled fury. His years of military discipline were the only thing preventing him from exploding with rage. Marcus, still straddling his motorcycle with the engine running, felt as though his heart had stopped beating. The magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in. He had just caused a senior military officer to fall into a puddle and completely ruin what was obviously an extremely important uniform. The man looked like he was dressed for a royal ceremony, and now he looked like he had been caught in a mudslide. The scattered documents lay around the street like pieces of evidence at a crime scene. Some had landed in puddles and were already beginning to absorb the dirty water. Others had been caught by the morning breeze and were drifting down the street. Marcus could see that some of the papers bore official military seals and appeared to contain detailed diagrams and schedules. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice cracking with genuine distress. He quickly turned off his motorcycle engine and dismounted, rushing toward the fallen colonel. "Sir, please let me help you up. I didn't see you there. I mean, I saw you, but I didn't realize how close you were when I revved the engine." Colonel McDougal remained sitting in the puddle for another moment, as if his military mind was processing the situation and calculating the appropriate response. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but carried an undertone of steel that made Marcus realize this man was not someone to be trifled with. "Young man," the colonel said slowly, water still dripping from his uniform, "do you have any idea what you have just done?" Marcus extended his hand to help the colonel up, but the offer was ignored. "Sir, I know this looks terrible, and I take full responsibility. I was just trying to get your attention to ask for directions. I never meant for this to happen. Please, let me help you. Help me." Colonel McDougal's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his military bearing even while sitting in a puddle. "My boy, I am supposed to lead the opening ceremony of the Edinburgh military tattoo this evening. This uniform took 3 hours to prepare. Those documents you've helped scatter to the four winds contain classified information about tonight's performance." The weight of Marcus's mistake began to settle on him like a heavy blanket. The Edinburgh military tattoo wasn't just any event. It was one of the most prestigious military ceremonies in the world. Television crews would be there. Dignitaries from multiple countries would be in attendance, and he had just ruined the uniform of someone who appeared to be in charge of the whole thing. "The military tattoo," Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh no, sir, please tell me there's something I can do to fix this. I'll pay for dry cleaning. I'll replace the uniform. I'll do whatever it takes." Colonel McDougal finally accepted Marcus's assistance and rose to his feet, water squelching in his dress shoes with each movement. The full extent of the damage became apparent as he stood. His entire uniform was soaked and stained. Mud clung to the fabric in streaks and patches. The decorative elements that had been so carefully arranged were now askew or missing entirely. "Replace this uniform?" the colonel asked, his tone suggesting that Marcus had just proposed something impossible. "This is a custom-made ceremonial dress uniform of the Royal Scots Guards. The medals alone represent decades of service. Some of these decorations were earned in combat zones where better men than both of us have given their lives." Marcus felt smaller with each word. He had never been in the military himself, but he understood honor and respect. His grandfather had served, and his father had taught him to respect those who put their lives on the line for their country. What he had done, even accidentally, felt like a violation of everything he had been raised to believe in. "I understand," Sir Marcus said, trying to maintain some dignity while feeling utterly defeated. "I know I can't undo what just happened, but there has to be something I can do, some way to make this right." Colonel McDougal was now gathering the scattered documents, many of which were damaged beyond use. The carefully prepared schedules were smeared with muddy water. The precise timing charts were illegible. Months of planning were literally dissolving in the Edinburgh street. "Make this right," the colonel repeated, holding up a document that was dripping with dirty water. These papers contained the final coordination details for 12 different military units from 6 countries. The backup copies are locked in a safe at the castle, and I am supposed to be there in 30 minutes to brief the other commanding officers. Marcus realized that his simple mistake had created a cascade of problems that extended far beyond a dirty uniform. The military tattoo involved hundreds of performers, thousands of spectators and military personnel from around the world. The ripple effects of this accident could potentially impact the entire event. Standing there in the narrow Edinburgh street, both men faced the gravity of the situation. The colonel, despite his years of training for unexpected circumstances, had never dealt with anything quite like this. Marcus, who prided himself on being able to fix almost any problem, found himself confronting a situation that seemed beyond repair. The morning that had started with such promise for both men had taken a turn that neither could have imagined. The question now was whether this disaster could somehow be transformed into something that might, against all odds, work out for everyone involved. As the reality of the situation settled in, Marcus's mind began working frantically to find a solution. He had always been a problem solver, someone who could think quickly under pressure. His job as a courier had taught him to navigate unexpected challenges and find creative ways to get things done when conventional methods failed. Sir Marcus said, his voice gaining strength as an idea began to form. "I know this sounds crazy, but I think I can help. My motorcycle can get us anywhere in this city faster than any car, especially with all these road closures for the tattoo preparations. If you need to get to the castle quickly, I can have you there in 10 minutes. Colonel MacDougall looked at Marcus as if he had just suggested they fly to the moon. "Young man, I cannot arrive at Edinburgh Castle on the back of a motorcycle, dressed like I've been swimming in the city's gutters. Do you understand the protocol involved in military ceremonies of this magnitude?" "I understand it's important, sir," Marcus replied. "But right now, getting you there quickly seems more important than how you arrive. You said the backup documents are at the castle. If we can get there fast enough, maybe you can still prepare for your briefing." The colonel glanced at his watch and realized that Marcus had a point. Traditional transportation would take at least 20 minutes in the current traffic conditions created by the tattoo preparations. If he walked back to where his staff car was parked, it would take even longer. Time was becoming the most critical factor in salvaging the situation. "Even if I agreed to such an unconventional mode of transport," the colonel said, "I cannot appear before my fellow officers looking like this. Military bearing and appearance are not just traditions. They are fundamental to maintaining respect and authority." Marcus nodded, understanding the colonel's dilemma. Then another idea struck him. "Sir, what if we could get you cleaned up and into a different uniform before the briefing? Do you have any spare uniforms at the castle? There is a quartermaster's office with emergency supplies." Colonel MacDougall admitted reluctantly, "But those would be standard duty uniforms, not ceremonial dress, and they certainly wouldn't have my specific insignia and decorations. But they would be clean and dry," Marcus pointed out. "And if we move fast enough, you could still conduct your briefing and then worry about getting your ceremonial uniform sorted out for tonight's performance." The colonel stood in the street, still dripping, weighing his options. His military training had taught him to adapt to changing circumstances and make decisions quickly when faced with unexpected challenges. The young man's proposal was highly irregular, but it might be the only way to salvage what was turning into a complete disaster. "You're asking me to trust my career and the success of an international military ceremony to a motorcycle courier I've just met," the colonel said. But his tone suggested he was actually considering the idea. "Sir, I'm asking you to let me try to fix the mess I created," Marcus replied. "I know I can get you to the castle safely and quickly, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to help you solve the other problems we've created." Colonel MacDougall looked once more at his ruined uniform, then at the scattered papers, and finally at Marcus's earnest face. Sometimes, he reflected, the most unconventional solutions were the only ones that worked. His grandfather had told him stories of World War II, when desperate situations had called for desperate measures and unlikely alliances. "Very well," the colonel said, surprising both Marcus and himself. "But I want to be absolutely clear about something. If we do this, I expect military precision in execution. No showboating, no unnecessary risks, and absolute discretion about the circumstances that led to this arrangement." Marcus felt a surge of relief and determination. "Yes, sir, you have my word. We'll take the most direct route, observe all traffic laws, and I'll make sure you arrive safely and as quickly as possible." The colonel began gathering the documents that were still salvageable while Marcus prepared his motorcycle. As he worked, the colonel found himself studying the young man who had inadvertently created this crisis. Despite the disastrous circumstances of their meeting, there was something about Marcus that suggested reliability and competence. "What's your name, son?" the colonel asked as he approached the motorcycle. "Marcus Thompson, sir. I've lived in Edinburgh my whole life and I know every street in this city. I promise you I can navigate us through any traffic or road closures." "And you do this courier work for a living?" "Yes, sir. I've been riding motorcycles since I was 16 and I've never had an accident or failed to deliver a package on time. I know this situation started badly, but I won't let you down." Colonel MacDougall found himself somewhat impressed despite the circumstances. The young man's confidence seemed genuine, and his knowledge of the city would indeed be valuable given the current traffic disruptions. Moreover, there was something to be said for his willingness to take responsibility for his mistake and actively work to fix it. "I've never ridden on a motorcycle," the colonel admitted as Marcus handed him a spare helmet. "It's perfectly safe, sir. Just hold on and lean slightly in the direction we turn. The key is to relax and trust the bike. Fighting the movement makes it more difficult for both of us." As the colonel put on the helmet, Marcus couldn't help but notice how surreal the situation had become. Less than 15 minutes ago, he had been planning a quiet ride home after completing his deliveries. Now he was preparing to transport a senior military officer through Edinburgh on the back of his Harley-Davidson in an attempt to salvage an international military ceremony. "Are you ready, sir?" Marcus asked, starting the engine and keeping it at a low rumble to avoid startling the colonel again. "As ready as I'll ever be for something like this," Colonel MacDougall replied, climbing carefully onto the back of the motorcycle. "I trust you understand that my career and the reputation of my regiment are now partially in your hands." "I understand completely. Sir, we'll be at the castle before you know it." As they pulled away from the narrow street where their unlikely partnership had begun, both men were acutely aware of how much had changed in such a short time. The colonel, despite his military training and decades of experience with unexpected situations, had never faced anything quite like this. Marcus, meanwhile, felt the weight of responsibility heavier than anything he had ever carried in his courier work. The ride through Edinburgh's streets took on an almost dreamlike quality. The morning sun cast long shadows between the historic buildings, and the city seemed to pulse with anticipation for the evening's military tattoo. Tourists and locals alike stopped and stared as the unusual pair made their way toward the castle. The sight of a formal military officer riding on the back of a Harley-Davidson being something few people expected to see. As they navigated through the traffic and road closures, Marcus found himself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. His simple decision to take a different route home had resulted in an encounter that was changing both their lives. Sometimes, he reflected, the most significant moments came from the most unexpected circumstances. Colonel MacDougall, meanwhile, was discovering that riding on a motorcycle was both more frightening and more exhilarating than he had imagined. The speed with which they moved through the city was impressive, and he had to admit that Marcus's knowledge of Edinburgh's streets was proving invaluable. They were making better time than would have been possible by any other means of transportation. As Edinburgh Castle came into view, both men knew that their unusual journey was just the beginning of what promised to be an extraordinary day. The morning's disaster had created an unlikely bond between them, and they were about to discover whether their improvised solution would be enough to save the military tattoo and perhaps create a story that would be remembered for years to come. The imposing walls of Edinburgh Castle loomed ahead as Marcus skillfully maneuvered his Harley-Davidson through the final stretch of cobblestone streets. The ancient fortress, perched dramatically on its volcanic rock, had witnessed centuries of Scottish history, but it was unlikely that it had ever seen an arrival quite like this one. As they approached the main entrance, several guards in crisp military uniforms looked up with expressions of complete bewilderment. The sight of Colonel MacDougall, whom they clearly recognized despite his bedraggled appearance, arriving on the back of a motorcycle driven by a leather-clad civilian, was unprecedented in their experience. "Sir," one of the guards called out as Marcus brought the motorcycle to a smooth stop. "Is everything all right?" Colonel MacDougall dismounted with as much dignity as he could manage, considering his uniform was still damp and stained. "Sergeant Morrison, I need you to escort Mr. Thompson here to the visitors area and ensure he's comfortable. He has provided valuable assistance this morning under unusual circumstances." "Of course, Sir," Sergeant Morrison replied, though his confusion was evident as he took in the colonel's disheveled appearance. "And Sergeant," the colonel continued, "I need you to contact the quartermaster immediately. I require a complete change of uniform, and we need to retrieve the backup documentation for this evening's ceremony from the secure storage." As the guards sprang into action, Colonel MacDougall turned to Marcus, who was removing his helmet and trying to process the grandeur of his surroundings. "Mr. Thompson, I want to thank you for getting me here so quickly. Your knowledge of the city and your riding skills probably saved the day. I'm just glad I could help fix what I broke." "Sir," Marcus replied. "Is there anything else I can do?" The colonel paused, considering. The morning's events had revealed something about this young man's character that impressed him. Marcus had taken responsibility for his mistake and had worked creatively and courageously to find a solution. These were qualities that the colonel valued highly, both in military service and in civilian life. "Actually, there might be," the colonel said slowly. "The backup documents are comprehensive, but they lack some of the personal notes and modifications I had made to the original copies. If you're willing to stay for a while, I might need your help in reconstructing some of the information that was lost." Marcus was surprised by the request. "Sir, I don't know anything about military ceremonies or protocols. I'm not sure how I could be helpful with that." "You'd be surprised what a fresh perspective can offer," Colonel MacDougall replied. "Besides, you've already demonstrated problem-solving skills that most of my officers would envy. And frankly, after this morning's adventure, I think we make a rather effective team." As they walked through the castle grounds, Marcus found himself in awe of the historic surroundings. The ancient stones seemed to whisper stories of battles fought and won, of kings and queens who had walked these same paths centuries ago. The contrast between his leather jacket and motorcycle boots and the formal military environment was stark, but somehow he didn't feel out of place. They were met by Major Patricia Williams, the colonel's seconding, who did an admirable job of hiding her shock at seeing her commanding officer's appearance. "Sir, I've been trying to reach you for the past 20 minutes. The other unit commanders are gathering for the briefing, and there have been some questions about the timing for the opening sequence." "Major Williams, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson," the colonel said. "Due to some unexpected circumstances this morning, Mr. Thompson has become an unofficial consultant on today's proceedings. I'll explain everything shortly, but first, I need to get cleaned up and review the backup documentation." Major Williams nodded professionally, though Marcus could see the curiosity in her eyes. As a career military officer, she had learned to adapt to unexpected situations, but this was clearly something new even for her. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. While Colonel MacDougall changed into a fresh uniform, Marcus found himself in a conference room surrounded by detailed maps, timing charts, and photographs of the castle's esplanade where the evening's ceremony would take place. The complexity of coordinating hundreds of performers from multiple countries was staggering. When the colonel returned, looking much more like the distinguished military officer he was, he began the process of reconstructing the information that had been lost when the documents were scattered in the street. Marcus watched with fascination as the colonel's memory and years of experience came into play. The opening sequence requires precise timing, the colonel explained to Marcus while referencing the backup documents. Each unit enters the performance area at specific intervals, and the music must be synchronized perfectly with the movements. In my original notes, I had identified 3 potential problem areas where timing could become critical. What kind of problems? Marcus asked, finding himself genuinely interested in the logistical challenges, whether delays, equipment malfunctions, or communication issues. The colonel replied, in outdoor ceremonies like this, you always have to plan for the unexpected. That's why the original notes were so important. They contained contingency plans for various scenarios. As they worked together to reconstruct the lost information, Marcus began to understand the magnitude of what the colonel was responsible for. The Edinburgh military tattoo wasn't just a performance, it was a carefully orchestrated international event that required months of planning and split-second execution. Sir, Marcus said after studying one of the timing charts, what if you had someone positioned with a radio at each of these potential problem points? Someone who could communicate directly with you if issues arise during the ceremony. Colonel MacDougall looked up from the documents with interest. That's actually an excellent suggestion. We do have communication protocols in place, but having dedicated observers at critical points could provide an extra layer of security. Major Williams, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded in agreement. It would give us real-time feedback on how each sequence is playing out from the audience perspective as the morning progressed. Marcus found himself becoming more involved in the planning process. His outsider's perspective allowed him to ask questions that the military personnel, steeped in tradition and protocol, might not have considered. His practical experience in navigating the city and dealing with unexpected challenges proved valuable in identifying potential logistical issues. Colonel MacDougall said during a brief break in their work, when I woke up this morning, if someone had told me that I would be taking advice on military ceremony logistics from a motorcycle courier, I would have questioned their sanity. And if someone had told me I'd be sitting in Edinburgh Castle helping plan an international military ceremony, I would have thought they were completely mad. Marcus replied with a smile. The transformation in their relationship, from the morning's disastrous beginning to their current collaboration, was remarkable. What had started as an accident that seemed to ruin everything had evolved into an unexpected partnership that was actually improving their preparations for the evening's event. As lunchtime approached, Major Williams briefed them on the afternoon schedule. Sir, the full dress rehearsal begins at 2 o'clock. All unit commanders need to be in position by 1:30 for final coordination. And the weather forecast? The colonel asked. Clear skies are predicted through this evening, sir. Conditions should be perfect for the ceremony. Marcus felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. He had become so involved in the planning that he felt personally invested in the success of the evening's event. The military tattoo had transformed from something he had only heard about to something he had helped prepare for. Mr. Thompson, the colonel said, I have a proposition for you. Given your contributions to this morning's crisis management and this afternoon's planning, I would like to invite you to attend tonight's ceremony as my personal guest. You've earned a place of honor at what I believe will be an exceptional evening. Marcus was speechless. The morning had started with him accidentally ruining a military officer's uniform, and now he was being invited to attend one of Edinburgh's most prestigious events as an honored guest. The turnaround was so dramatic that it seemed almost surreal. Sir, I would be honored to attend, Marcus finally managed to say, but I have to ask, are you sure this is appropriate? I mean, I'm just a courier who happened to make a very big mistake this morning. You're a man who took responsibility for his actions and worked tirelessly to make things right. Colonel MacDougall replied, in my experience, those qualities are rare and valuable, regardless of someone's profession or background. Besides, after today's adventure, I think you've earned the right to see how this story ends. The afternoon rehearsal was a spectacle that Marcus would never forget. From his vantage point in the control area, he watched as hundreds of military personnel from around the world moved with precision and grace across the castle's esplanade. Bagpipe bands from Scotland marched in perfect formation, their kilts swaying in unison. Military bands from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand demonstrated the musical traditions that connected the Commonwealth nations. The scale and complexity of the operation was breathtaking. Marcus observed as Colonel MacDougall coordinated between multiple units using hand signals, radio communications, and split-second timing. The contingency planning they had worked on that morning proved its value when a brief equipment malfunction threatened to disrupt one of the musical sequences. Observer 3 to control, came a voice over the radio. We have a timing delay in Sector 4. The Canadian band is running 30 seconds behind schedule. Without hesitation, Colonel MacDougall activated the backup plan they had refined that morning. All units, implement timing adjustment, Protocol 7, extend the Scottish regimental entrance by 45 seconds, and signal the pipe major for the extended flourish sequence. Marcus watched in amazement, as the entire ceremony adjusted seamlessly to accommodate the delay. What could have been a disaster was handled so smoothly that most observers wouldn't have even noticed there had been a problem. The Colonel's years of experience, combined with their morning's planning session, who had created a system that could adapt to unexpected challenges. That was incredible, Marcus said during a brief break in the rehearsal. How do you keep track of so many moving parts? Experience, preparation, and having good people in key positions, Colonel MacDougall replied. But I have to admit, having those extra observation points you suggested has made coordination much easier. We're getting feedback I've never had before during these ceremonies. Major Williams approached with an update. Sir, all units report ready for the evening performance. The equipment issues have been resolved, and the weather forecast remains favorable. We should have perfect conditions for tonight. As the rehearsal continued, Marcus began to understand the deep traditions and meaning behind each element of the ceremony. The military tattoo wasn't just entertainment. It was a celebration of military heritage, international cooperation, and the enduring bonds between nations that shared common values and history. The highlight of the rehearsal came when Colonel MacDougall led his own unit, the Royal Scots Guards, through their ceremonial sequence. Marcus watched with pride as the man he had accidentally knocked into a puddle that morning commanded the respect and attention of hundreds of performers and observers. The Colonel's bearing was impeccable, his timing flawless, and his leadership inspiring. "Your Colonel is quite remarkable," said a voice behind Marcus. He turned to see Major Williams standing beside him, also watching the Royal Scots Guards performance. "He's not exactly my Colonel," Marcus replied with a smile. "This morning was the first time we'd ever met, and it didn't start well. I heard about the uniform incident," Major Williams said with a slight grin. "The story is already becoming legendary among the staff. But I have to say, the Colonel seems genuinely impressed with your contributions today. He's not someone who offers praise lightly." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself thinking about how dramatically his life had changed in the space of a few hours. He had started the day as a simple courier making routine deliveries. Now he was involved in planning and observing one of Scotland's most prestigious international events. The transformation seemed almost magical. The rehearsal concluded with a full run-through of the closing ceremony, featuring all units performing together in a grand finale that brought tears to the eyes of many observers. The sound of hundreds of musicians playing in harmony, set against the dramatic backdrop of Edinburgh Castle, created a moment of transcendent beauty that Marcus knew he would remember for the rest of his life. "Well, Mr. Thompson," Colonel MacDougall said as the rehearsal ended, "what did you think of your first military ceremony?" "Sir, I had no idea such things were possible," Marcus replied honestly. "The precision, the coordination, the sheer beauty of it all. I'm honored to have been allowed to observe and even more honored to have contributed in some small way." "Your contributions were hardly small," the Colonel assured him. "The observation system you suggested worked perfectly, and your fresh perspective helped us identify several potential issues we might have missed. Otherwise, as the sun began to set over Edinburgh, the transformation of the castle esplanade from rehearsal area to evening venue began in earnest. Lighting technicians made final adjustments to ensure perfect illumination. The sound engineers tested every microphone and speaker. Ushers prepared to welcome the thousands of spectators who would fill the temporary grandstands that had been erected around the performance area. Marcus was given a brief break to return home and change into appropriate attire for the evening's ceremony. As he rode his motorcycle through the Edinburgh streets, he reflected on the extraordinary turn his day had taken. The same streets where he had caused such chaos that morning now felt different to him. He was no longer just a courier navigating the city. He was someone who had become part of Edinburgh's story, even if only for one remarkable day. When he arrived at his apartment, Marcus faced a dilemma he had never encountered before. What does a motorcycle courier wear to attend the Edinburgh military tattoo as the personal guest of a senior military officer? His wardrobe consisted mainly of leather jackets, jeans, and work clothes suitable for his courier duties. After considerable thought, Marcus settled on his best pair of dark trousers, a white dress shirt that he kept for special occasions, and a dark blazer that had belonged to his father. It wasn't formal military attire, but it was respectful and appropriate for the occasion. He also decided to wear his grandfather's watch, a simple but elegant timepiece that had belonged to the man who had first inspired his respect for military service. As he prepared to return to the castle, Marcus caught sight of himself in the mirror. The transformation from the morning's leather-clad courier to the evening's appropriately dressed guest seemed to symbolize the larger transformation he had experienced that day. He was still the same person, but he had discovered capabilities and potential within himself that he hadn't known existed. The ride back to Edinburgh Castle took him through streets, now filled with people making their way to the evening's performance. Tourists from around the world walked alongside local residents, all united in their anticipation for the spectacle they were about to witness. Marcus felt a surge of pride, knowing that he had played a small but meaningful role in making this evening possible. As he approached the castle, Marcus realized that the evening's ceremony would be both an ending and a beginning. It would conclude the remarkable day that had started with such disaster but had evolved into something extraordinary. But it would also begin a new chapter in his life, one in which he had discovered that his capabilities extended far beyond what he had previously imagined. The stage was set for an evening that would create memories lasting a lifetime, not just for the thousands of spectators who would witness the ceremony, but especially for a motorcycle courier and a military colonel whose accidental meeting had blossomed into an unexpected friendship and mutual respect that would endure long after the last note of bagpipe music had faded into the Edinburgh night. The evening air was crisp and filled with anticipation as Marcus returned to Edinburgh Castle. The ancient fortress had been transformed into a theatre of lights and sounds, with thousands of spectators filing into their seats around the esplanade. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the excitement of an international audience gathered to witness one of the world's most prestigious military ceremonies. Colonel MacDougall met Marcus at the VIP entrance, looking every inch the distinguished military officer he was meant to be. His ceremonial uniform was immaculate, every detail perfect from the polished buttons to the precisely arranged medals. It was hard to believe that just 12 hours earlier, this same uniform had been lying in muddy pieces scattered across the Edinburgh street. "Mr. Thompson, you clean up rather well," the colonel said with a warm smile. "I trust you're ready for what promises to be an unforgettable evening." "As ready as I'll ever be, sir," Marcus replied. "I still can't quite believe this is happening. This morning I was just making deliveries, and now I'm about to attend one of the most famous ceremonies in the world. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it," Colonel MacDougall observed. "Sometimes our worst moments lead to our best opportunities." They were joined by Major Williams and several other senior officers, all of whom had heard the story of the morning's adventure and Marcus's subsequent contributions to the day's preparations. Rather than being treated as an outsider, Marcus found himself welcomed as someone who had earned his place among them through his actions and character. 5 minutes to opening ceremony, announced a voice over the communication system. "All units to final positions." Colonel MacDougall straightened his uniform one last time and turned to Marcus. "This is it. Everything we planned and prepared for today comes down to the next 2 hours. I want you to know that having you involved in today's preparations has made this a better ceremony than it would have been otherwise." As the colonel took his position to lead the opening sequence, Marcus was escorted to a prime viewing location where he could observe the entire ceremony. The grandstands were packed with people from around the world, their faces reflecting excitement and anticipation. Television cameras were positioned strategically to capture every moment for the millions of viewers who would watch the ceremony broadcast worldwide. Ceremony began with a dramatic fanfare that echoed off the castle walls and seemed to reverberate through the very stones of Edinburgh. As the first military unit marched onto the esplanade, Marcus felt a surge of emotion that surprised him. He had become personally invested in this event, and seeing it unfold perfectly filled him with a profound sense of pride and accomplishment. Colonel MacDougall led the Royal Scots Guards with a precision and grace that commanded the attention and respect of everyone present. His bearing was flawless, his timing impeccable, and his leadership inspiring. As Marcus watched, he felt a deep respect for this man who had transformed a morning disaster into an opportunity for growth and collaboration. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly, with each unit performing their segments with the precision that comes from months of preparation and years of military training. The observation posts that Marcus had suggested provided real-time feedback that were allowed for subtle adjustments that kept every element perfectly synchronized. The highlight of the evening came during the massed band's performance, when hundreds of musicians from multiple countries played together in a stirring rendition of traditional Scottish airs. The sound was overwhelming in its beauty and power, creating a moment of unity that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. As the ceremony neared its climax, Marcus noticed something unexpected happening around him. Other spectators had begun asking who he was and how he had come to be seated in such a prestigious location. Word of the morning's adventure and his contributions to the day's preparations had spread among the military personnel, and some of that story had filtered out to the audience. "Excuse me," said an elderly woman sitting nearby, "but are you the young man who helped save today's ceremony? My grandson is serving with one of the units performing tonight, and he told me an amazing story about a motorcycle courier who became a hero." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the attention and the word hero. He had simply tried to fix a mistake he had made, but he was beginning to understand that his actions had resonated with people in ways he hadn't expected. The story was taking on a life of its own, becoming part of the folklore surrounding the Edinburgh military tattoo. The ceremony concluded with the traditional lone piper playing a haunting lament from the castle bat silhouetted against the night sky. The sound carried across the esplanade and out over the city, a fitting end to an evening of exceptional beauty and emotional power. As the applause died down and the audience began to disperse, Colonel McDougal made his way back to where Marcus was sitting. The colonel's face showed the satisfaction of a job well done, but there was also something else in his expression, a warmth and genuine affection that spoke of a friendship forged in the crucible of shared challenge. "Well, Mr. Thompson, what did you think of your first Edinburgh military tattoo?" the colonel asked. "Sir, I don't have words for what I just experienced," Marcus replied. "It was beautiful, moving, and inspiring all at the same time. And knowing that I played some small part in making it happen makes it even more meaningful." "You played more than a small part," Colonel McDougal assured him. "Your contributions today were significant, and I want to make sure you know that. In fact, I have a proposal for you." Marcus looked at him with curiosity, wondering what other surprises this remarkable day might hold. "How would you feel about becoming a permanent consultant for future military tattoo ceremonies?" the colonel asked. "Your fresh perspective and problem-solving abilities could be valuable assets for our planning committees. It would be an official position with appropriate compensation." Marcus was stunned. The offer was completely unexpected and represented an opportunity he never could have imagined when he woke up that morning. "Sir, are you serious? You would trust me with that kind of responsibility? I've seen your character under pressure. Mr. Thompson, I've watched you take responsibility for your mistakes and work tirelessly to make things right. Those qualities are exactly what we need in our organization." As they walked through the castle grounds, now quiet after the evening's excitement, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. A single mistake that morning had led to opportunities and friendships that would change his life forever. "I'm honored by your offer, Sir," Marcus said finally, "and I accept, with the understanding that I still have a lot to learn about military ceremonies and traditions." "We all have things to learn, son," Colonel McDougal replied. "The key is being open to new experiences and willing to grow from them." Several months later, Marcus would find himself working closely with military personnel from around the world, helping to plan and coordinate international ceremonies that celebrated the bonds between nations and the traditions that unite military services across cultures. His motorcycle courier business evolved into a specialized logistics company that provided services for major events throughout Scotland. The story of the biker who destroyed a Royal Guards uniform and then helped save the military tattoo became legendary in Edinburgh, told and retold in pubs and gathering places throughout the city. But for Marcus and Colonel McDougal, the story was about something much deeper than an amusing anecdote. It was about the unexpected ways that life can change direction, about the importance of taking responsibility for our actions, and about the remarkable things that can happen when people from different backgrounds come together to solve problems and create something beautiful. Years later, when Marcus had become a respected figure in Edinburgh's event planning community and Colonel McDougal had retired with full honors, they would still meet regularly for coffee and conversation. They would remember that extraordinary day when disaster had transformed into opportunity, when a chance encounter had blossomed into lasting friendship, and when both men had discovered capabilities within themselves they never knew existed. The Edinburgh military tattoo continued to be performed annually, and each year Marcus would remember that first ceremony when he had stood freezing with amazement and pride, watching the fruits of his unexpected labor unfold in perfect harmony against the backdrop of Scotland's most famous castle. It remained a reminder that sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest triumphs, and that the most meaningful relationships often begin in the most unlikely circumstances.